Sometimes the beginning of a document tells you something about what you should expect as you read your way through it. If I open up one of Lucas's children's books and it begins with the phrase, "a long time ago in a kingdom far, far away," I can pretty much assume that I'm about to start reading a fairy tale. And if you find a letter that begins, "to whom it may concern," then you might be looking at either the beginning of a complaint letter or some sort of blanket authorization, and nobody really knew exactly where to address it. So at the beginning today of our reading from the book of Romans, when Paul says, "What are we to say about these things?" he's sending his readers a signal that they're entering into a certain kind of literature. This literature is called a diatribe, and it pits Paul against an imaginary debating opponent. Paul imagines himself going toe-to-toe against a Gentile Christian, someone who's come to the Christian faith from some other religion and might be misinterpreting the pretty radical thing that Paul has just finished saying at the end of the preceding chapter. If you've been reading along with us in the book of Romans, you'll see how Paul uses chapter 5 to talk about how Jesus' life, death, and resurrection are the answer to human sin, and how we've been adopted into a new family that does things differently than the world around us. Paul would say that once we belonged to the family of Adam, the first human, and they were caught in the cycle of sin that he started, a pattern of sin and death where we could never hope to earn God's favor or live in the way that God desires. But Jesus brings us into a new family, the family of God, where our efforts aren't targeted at avoiding sin, but instead living in the mercy and forgiveness that's already been freely given to us all along, and then extending that same mercy and forgiveness to others. This is one of those themes that we're going to see come up over and over again as we read together through Romans. Jesus came to begin a new kind of family, not one bound up in sin and shame and death, but instead bound together in baptism and called to follow the example of Jesus and to care for the world that God made. Now, all of that can seem like nice, flowery language. But for Paul's first audience, it would have had radical implications. You see, the Romans and their surrounding people had this story about themselves that effectively said that whatever was true about your parents or your grandparents was going to be true about you as well. Their lot in life would be your lot in life. There was no escaping the past. There's no changing the future. The way things are now is how they will always be. You don't even have to look very hard in the scriptures to find passages that support this very idea. You could flip to pages in the Bible and see where it says that the sins of the parents are visited on children even to the third or fourth generation. And Isaiah tells the people he was preaching to that the parents have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. So, if they were in the family of Adam, if they'd inherited generation after generation of sin and had no hope of breaking out of the cycle, it was always going to be that way. No hope, no promise, no opportunity. But in the new family of God, made possible by the resurrection of Jesus, you're not bound by your yesterdays. You're not bound by your parents or your grandparents. You're not bound by your mistakes. In this new family of faith, all those things are in the past, and they've been drowned in the waters of baptism. They've been hung on the cross. They've been left in the tomb. This is what Paul means when he says that you're dead to sin. You are dead to those things, and they cannot pursue you any longer. You've been raised to new life. When Paul says that we've been united in a death like Jesus, therefore we'll also be united in a resurrection like his. This isn't just a promise for after our lungs stop breathing or our hearts stop beating. This is a promise for new life and new beginnings here and now on this side of the grave. This has powerful implications for us all these years later. It means that no amount of terrible choices yesterday puts us beyond God's love today. It means that no person is too far gone for God to begin the work of turning over a new leaf in their lives. And it also means that an entire society can begin anew. As a society, we're in the midst of several painful conversations. We're being asked to reckon honestly with our past and our present, and to think creatively about what sort of new beginnings are needed. These new beginnings are almost certainly going to be difficult, because they're going to mean taking hard and honest looks at our past behavior and asking God to create new hearts in us that yearn for justice and that recognize the image of God in each and every person. But these are the hallmarks of God's new family, claimed in baptism, marked with the sign of the cross, and sent into the world to bring life and love into chaos and despair. This is the work that we're called to, dear friends. And so be well. May the God who claimed you just as you are form you to work as an agent of God's radical and transforming love for the healing of a world that desperately needs it. Amen.